that.
Welcome, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here. And thank you very much for joining us for the different places where you are. This webinar is an activity of the IPA Communications Committee, coordinated by Mariano Hupperhutz and under the direction of Sylvia Weinbuch. This webinar will be recorded, so those registered who cannot attend online can watch the video later. And then the video will also be accessible on YouTube to the public. To start, I wanted to introduce not only the webinar topic and the speakers. This webinar is called Psychoanalysis and Teleanalysis, the patient, the analyst, the institution. After the COVID-19 pandemic, the traditional way of practicing psychoanalysis had changed significantly. All the processes usually understood in person have been resignified in a remote modality. This has generated fascinating clinical and theoretical issues that this webinar wishes to explore. Three expert analysts on this subject will discuss their own experience, projecting interesting reflections on teleanalysis. Although it is not an institutional webinar, the three panelists had already worked a lot on IPA Task Force 1 on remote analysis, the three of them, and then on the Task Force 2 on teleanalysis, which is actually Liliana Manguel's position. Okay? So this webinar will feature three distinguished panelists: Andrea Marzi, Liliana Manguel, and Martina Burdet. But before handing over the presentation to our speakers, I will briefly explain how this webinar will function. It has two sections. In the first section, each speaker will give up to 15-minute presentation. The speaker's opinions are personal and are not institutional position. The second part of the webinar is a question and answer portion devoted to freely exchanging selected questions and ideas with the speakers and attendees. And pay attention, you will find a question box on the right side of the screen. Then, if you want to ask a question, please write it in the box. You can post your question throughout the whole course of the webinar. Okay? Then we are ready to begin. We'll start with Andrea Marzi's presentation. Andrea Marzi is a medical doctor, psychiatrist, and psychoanalyst. He has a PhD in medical ethics. He is also IPA, APSA, and Italian Society full member. He is a former IPA member of the Task Force 1 on remote analysis in training. He is a member of the Italian Society Committee for the revision of the Society Code of Ethics 2020. Some of his several publications, I had to shorten it, are: he is author and editor of Psychoanalysis, Identity, and the Internet, Karnak 2016. And he also published The Body Vanishes, Preliminary Thoughts on Bodily Experience and the Identity of the Analyst in Remote Analysis, at the 2022 Gradiva Award Best Edited Book called Body as Psychoanalytic Objects, Clinical Applications from Winnicott to Beyond and Beyond, Routledge 2022. Please, Andrea, it's your time.
Thank you, Sergio, for this nice presentation. And I would like to thank all the organizers for this very important webinar, and all of you who are attending this webinar beyond the screen, I would say. And I will try to speak extemporaneously, but also I will need to read some parts of my paper. The interactive field between psychoanalysis and digital technology has become very vast with many different developments. However, it should immediately be emphasized that the complex and all too articulated vision of psychoanalysis with respect to the digital world cannot be superimposed and assimilated to the reflective and procedural dimension that concerns the controversial field that goes by the name of teleanalysis. We
You are muted, Andrea. We cannot hear you. Now it's okay. Go on.
Did you hear me before?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
No. The last sentence you may be willing to repeat, please.
Yes. I only said that that it should immediately be emphasized that the complex and all too articulated vision of psychoanalysis with respect to the digital world cannot be superimposed and assimilated to the reflective and procedural dimension that concerns the controversial field that goes by the name of teleanalysis. I would like to propose here two very important topics. One is the problem of the interface between the body and the teleanalysis. The second one should be another controversial problem, the one about the institutional and procedural dimension. As you can see, it is the program is ambitious, but in the time allowed, I think I will only be able to give some hints on the first topic, and moreover, I will not be able to address the second part of the speech for reasons of time. Maybe it will be a subject for a future webinar, or who knows, for the next debate. The best known parameters concerning the body-mind aspects are challenged that in virtual reality, we are confronted with a different fact. We have to deal with a never body. It is very relevant. I borrowed this word, never body, from the Never Never Land of Peter Pan, meaning that, as it is translated in Italian, the island that there is not. So it is very relevant that we can imagine the aspects constituting the body and bodiness as existing in the digital world also, in that space that we need to imagine as such for our need for representation. We can also imagine it to be a digital body, or that such a body lives and inhabits it with its specific characteristics and contents. But the digital body is not a material body. It is not a concrete and physical, tangible body. It is rather a body imagined as such by the user. The digital body in cyberspace is not an external other to approach and recognize, but a prothetic extension of one's own proto-mental inner world. It is therefore a dimension that we could ascribe to the psychisoma, recalling Winnicott, or to the body-mind/mind-body elaborated by James Grotstein. It is rather a virtuality that settles in cyberspace through an interaction of the subject with the digital space and its information contents. It can be thought of as a digital body if, in this relationship, some three-dimensionality is activated, and with it the possibility to conjure within the space the presence of proto-informatic elements, in the sense I have proposed several times in my writings, with features similar to the proto-mental elements present in the subject. However, it is true that this body can remain mute, uncharted, unrepresented, and unrepresentable. And in this case, it approaches the dimension of the unrepresented primal process. So, in the case of impossibility or difficulty in evolving to three-dimensionality, one can create hypermaterialization or hypersensualization. One of the most common criticism against the practice of teleanalysis is that the whole body, considered as essential, becomes virtual, and if it is not really there, it is said that analysis cannot be carried out, inadequate transference cannot develop, and so on. What seems essential, actually, is not the physical presence tout court, which is overestimated at times, but rather to work analytically with the proto-informatic elements in this dimension too. In other words, it seems to me that also with remote analysis, analytical thinkability and work can develop if the needs for creative exchange are met, whereas its collapse is due to the demise of this relatedness. This indicates some contiguity rather than divergence with the dimension of the in-person analytic relationship. In other words, we need to consider as one of the essential elements the creation of the genuine three-dimensionality stemming from working through the very proto-informatic elements in the form of an ongoing psychic birth. We know that three-dimensionality allows the presence of the space, and this is very important. Most criticisms are often supported with Freud's statement, the ego is first and foremost a bodily ego. Das Ich ist vor allem ein körperliches, etc. As if it were one of the 10 commandments of the Bible, without grasping the genetic dynamic value of this non-totalizing affirmation. That is to say, its reference to a rooting of the ego in the ineliminable organicity that characterizes all living matter, but not an epistemological leap toward the need for a physical presence in every eventuality that concerns the analysis. Yet, as summarized by Janine Pouget just 1 year ago, people think that there is a psychoanalysis in our encounters only thanks to the physical presence. And if there isn't a body, there can be felt, touched, something is missing, nullifying the essential value of what we call psychoanalysis. The impression is that while changing the perspective and the theoretical/experiential starting point, the substance always returns to itself, to find a point of dignity for teleanalysis and to resolve the questions of the difference with respect to the traditional approach. This is basic, of course, but this is something that can be tackled with prudence and caution. Very often, on the contrary, the invitation to a more calibrated and weighted reflection often finds some hypermodern author accusing others of conservatism, retrogradism, suffering the new, or being inhabitants of the, I would say, analytical Jurassic Park. I prefer to approach teleanalytic practice as it is clear from what I try to say in my writings with caution. And on the other hand, the more moderate position of considering a choice that favors the logic of the case by case is advocated, at least for now, in the absence, I would say, of more solid certainties, but with a serious analytical attitude. What seems actually fundamental is not the physical presence tout court, sometimes overestimated, nor the consideration of the place. Even if, as has already happened, sitting down from the bathroom, on the deck chair, at the bar, or in excessively ectopic places, obviously does not appear acceptable. So what seems actually fundamental is working analytically with what I called the proto-informatic elements. Naturally, the frame, the inquadre alla Blecher, constitutes a condition on which to reflect a priori, because an excessive dissimilarity of the teleanalytic setting with respect to a classically established setting does not form, in my opinion, sufficient conditions for a genuine analytic relationship. Nevertheless, many others have pointed out, for example, Bion himself draws our attention again and radically to the fact that what matters in the analytic story is not so much the concrete bodily presence, which is sometimes an obstacle, but rather the preeminence of experience, which can therefore exist even with teleanalysis. Quote, if the mind is preoccupied with elements perceptible to sense, it will be that much less able to perceive elements that cannot be sensed. There is therefore a strong underlining of the importance not so much of the external sense organs, but of that inner sense organ that allows opening up to the dimension of the unknown, abandoning predominantly conscious modes of perception. The presence of the body is also, in my experience, a varying intensity condition. I mean, some patients do not feel the lack of it, others suffer from it. And it is precisely with this that the reflection on this modality must be more in depth carried on and evaluated. If the analytic couple takes into great account all these fundamental issues, in this way, the analytic couple will be able to elaborate the teleanalytic body sufficiently and with creativity, even if there is no concrete physical body, a concrete physical body. The perturbation of this process tends to greatly disturb the space and time inherent to the cyberspace itself, with some important and problematic consequences, such as the concretization of the digital space or the annihilation of time and space itself. It is therefore not the present/absent duality, but rather the possibilities of tolerating frustration and consequent elaboration that needs to be considered central in these cases. And I thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Andrea. Wonderful presentation. Now we'll hear Martina Burdet. She is a full member of the Madrid Psychoanalytic Association, chair of the ad hoc group of the European Federation of Psychoanalysis on Remote Analysis, and she is also a former IPA member of the Task Force 1 on Remote Analysis in Training. She is author of the lovely book, Love in the Time of the Internet. Do you love me, love with hat, or do you follow me? Please, Martina, we are listening to you.
Thank you very much for your kind presentation, Sergio. Good morning or good afternoon, dear colleagues. Sorry for my accent, of course. My title for this webinar is a very particular effect of the image on countertransference and the analyst body teleworking. I will reflect here very precisely on the impact of the image, of the perception of what can be named cyber body, digital body, or even absent body of the author, or the online body, that means no body but an image, a set of pixels, and its impact on the body of the analyst. A reflection on the new frontiers offered by teleworking with image and sound, which have long since penetrated with force into our society, which is eager to be seen and nourished by images. In my personal case, with patients who have not previously been in psychoanalysis following a classical setting, that is to say, sharing the same space, I work with the screen and the image because they don't have an internal setting. Freud, in Civilization and its Discontent, pointed out that every contribution of civilization perfected the organs of the body, its motor and sensory capacities, and added that these improvements or enlargements of the body could be linked to a fairy tale. In this sense, we could understand civilization as another organ of the body. This topic is new and relevant. In Teleanalysis, in an inter-bodies game takes place, repression is absent, lay of abstinence is not more valid. Bodies and in itself, a body's representation, even separate, can be strongly affected by images, sound, description. Thanks to virtuality, we pass to an enlargement of our sensitive body. The virtualization of the body is thus not a disincarnation, but a reinvention, a reincarnation, a multiplication. The limit never definitely drawn must be estimated, evaluated. That is that are word of Levi. I am interested in showing here the paradox that exists in relation to the intense bodily presence of the patient in my bodily and mental experience, regardless of the distance. I am interested in thinking about the image in working at the distance and it showing how the word I use is fishing or feeling my own sensual reality in relation to the patient image and discuss in such a way that my bodily reaction in the countertransference produces an unprecedented broadening of the understanding of certain cases. The patient showing himself or herself in light clothing, either in bed, is not a situation that occurs in a classical cure. The obviously desired effect of seduction or sexualization on the patient's side will, or not, have its effect on the analyst and the patient's body. In any case, the situation offers immense information in consonance and reverberation with the reaction on the mind and body of the analyst. What are expressing the uncovered bodies in special situations, perhaps precisely because they are at the distance? I wish here to evoke the countertransferential difficulty that is sometimes involved in having access to certain situations that are impossible in a face-to-face analysis. I am going to refer to a particular situation when the screen is entirely occupied by a bodily inner self to which one does not normally have access. In my thinking about a patient, I am thinking about a patient who yawns non-stop, making his wide open throat visible, occupying the entire screen. In this case, the fact that the bodies are not present in the same space gives rise to a paradox. It implies an overexposure of the bodies, something that, as analyst, I feel as the way from body to flesh. In those cases, I am disgusted by my visual penetration into an enormous throat. Are the elements of infantile sexuality? Different layers or wrapping are superimposed. The skin, the screen, the sound, the evocative power, the word. If somebody scratches his navel, for example, and enjoy the smell, I don't smell it, but I am invaded by a nauseating sensation of disgust due to the image. When I reflect on how to explain the disgusting vision of the live, fresh tissue of the patient's throat and what I feel, I associate it with the flesh of Lucian Freud or Georg Basilitz's painting. Flesh as crude meat. From meat to flesh, from flesh to mind. It is the flesh of the image and all its rawness. Hence, the violence with which I feel the image, in addition to the size of the computer screen, ferocity of the open mouth, it becomes violence intrusive and shows what is not normally sane. You don't see a large open throat on couches. It is an image that is too real. Normally, we listen beyond the words, but the raw image does not allow us to look beyond the image, always present and conjugated to the present. I remember Winnicott when he says he is working from his body ego. Even at the distance, the mouth filling the screen is felt as threatening my privacy. That's how it fell from the counter-transferential side. What I wish to emphasize is the intensity of my bodily reaction, of my sensuality overwhelmed by the image, probably unthinkable in the first moment. The image that made me cringe and offered the insides of the flesh was clearly related to disgusting infant products when taken out of their newborn's context to be applied to an adult. The so often evoked internal world of the patient flesh came to meet the orifice and their normally repressed pregenital sexuality that made me cringe as they paraded in image and word. Of course, without elaborating cases here, this was doubtlessly a shock among personal experience that I will not evoke here from my side. Of course, I was thinking of Freud's EMA injection. Teleworking here confronted us with a new situation. For me, it was a first and innovative experience to feel like bathing and at the same time bathed in and by the flesh of another. The image of flesh, the raw image of the patient in a raw flesh, a forbidden interior. Thanks to this unpleasant sensation from my visual perception and my bodily sensation, and also full of disgust, I was nonetheless accessing a lot of information regarding the absence of repression in the patient. During the sessions, the patient I have in mind overflowed all the limits of the screen. The screen was not his half body. It was his mouth completely open without a hand to cover the orifice, overflowing the boundaries of the screen. I certainly thought that all this had a lot to do with this fear of going mad that brought him to the practice in search of a limit. In other cases, I related with the inner body of a baby, gas, pee, that a mother could not contain or signify. Whatever it is, there is always non-symbolized remains at the origin, which will be here, there, insisting lifelong to express themselves and try a symbolization work, as Miss Onier says. What is clear is that the image in the virtual does not cease to produce effects. Merleau-Ponty affirms that our own experience of perception supposes an internal experience that leaves traces. For him, the image is not a copy and produces thoughts. The image of the patient's mouth wide open or the nude body of a woman give me sensation and thoughts. The analyst is touch and react to the body of his analyst online as seen. My body reacts.
Excuse me, Martina.
Yes, I'm finishing. I have a.
No, you have time. We cannot see you.
Oh.
There's something with your camera. Okay, thank
you. Okay. Sorry. The analyst is touch and reacts to the body of his analyst online as seen. My body reacts to the image, to the gesture, with representation emerging with the sensation in the body itself. Teleworking shows well how new forms of sensuality and tactility are appearing. The truth is that this well-being is more and more sensory and polysensory, even if it is increasingly depending on electronic and circuit information. Sensory perceptions constitute living transference and countertransference, the living part of the flesh of the word and the image. I have spoken of the flesh, of the image of the throat. The word human or human being will be exceeding the relation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Martina. Sorry for interrupting you. Now we will be hearing Liliana Manguel's speech. I will present her. Liliana is an adolescent and adult psychoanalyst, full member of the International Psychoanalytic Association, IPA, of the Latin American Psychoanalytic Federation, FEPAL, and of the Buenos Aires Psychoanalytic Association, APDEBA. She is IPA member of the task force. She was IPA member of the task force 1 on remote analysis in training, and now of the task force 2 on psychoanalytic training in contemporary times. Please go on, Liliana.
Hello. Hello. Thank you very much to all of you. Thank you, Sergio, and especially I want to
Liliana,
thank to
there's
the
something
API
with your video.
webinar committee.
There's something with your now it's okay. Thank
What
you.
happens now? Okay. Well, thank you, Sergio, very much, and thank all the API webinar committee that make this to be done. So thank you a lot, and thank you to all the audience that is here today. My paper is named Intimacy in Psychoanalysis Online. I want to refer to the different sensations and emotions that can emerge in telesessions in the DIAD in the analytic process. I think that the sense of closeness in the patient and in the analyst does not necessarily depend on physical proximity. The essence for me is a true encounter that will affect personal changes. Virtual reality allows the patient and the analyst emotional experience despite or because of the absence of the body in the same room. In telesessions, there is a different process of relational embodiment. The intercorporal dimension of conscious and unconscious communications is altered, but the importance of the verbal is highlighted, as well as the silences, the same as the vision, the perception, the sensations. In the analytical process, if the analytical process is created, it will happen in the office and or in telesessions. Batenson in 1972 says that the frame interaction must not be a rigid game, but structured so as to allow free play. I think that it's not about obedience rules, but it's a theoretical and ethical framework, which is part of an instrument that generates conditions for the process to occur. I want to ponder on the paradox Charlotta Borgin explained us. It's a paradox of being absent while present and being present in absence. In other side, the absence of the two bodies in the same room provides wide territories and the possibility of knowing much more the fantasies, the dreams of the patient, as well as the unconscious feelings. The internal representations and experiences of the bodies in telesessions are different, but not absent. Fantasies, empathy, and intimacy is more specific to a particular analytic diad than to the setting. I remember when Scarfon said in 2019 that analysis cannot be compared, not even with the same patient, which means that generalizations are not always reliable. Ehrlich in 2019 explains that the body does not need to be physically present, but the emotional meaning of the body needs to be present. For others, the physical object of desire need to be present. But what is clear for me is that the treatment in the diad will have different consequences if it's carried out of necessity or out of conviction in a theoretical elaboration of psychoanalysis. Many analysts need to work in telesessions for economic, political, geographical, or social situations. And after COVID-19, this practice has been much more accepted for some analysts and denied for others. Telesessions are similar enough and different enough to the clinical practice in the room. But remembering that psychoanalysis efficacy depends on the analytic process and the conviction that this kind of analysis is not a second choice. If an analyst is not convinced of working by telesessions, probably will not consider the patient reactions or his own reactions as a resistance or as a part of the countertransference. Telesessions is not a valuable option for everyone, and this is something to consider. It depends on the patient characteristics and the analyst characteristics. For example, with some adolescents that do many acting out, for example, the work in telesessions is sometimes much more difficult, but that's not mean impossible. The actions become sometimes the core of their life. The fantasies they have is that they can control life, and since they can no longer deny the possibility of controlling life, they escape from the wound of the omnipotence with different actions. It's the way they defend as not to feel fear, anguish, or pain. In those cases, as in others, the attitude of the analyst is fundamental. The analyst, with his desire to analyze, offers himself so that someone can speak as he can, when he can, and in the way he can. And many patients in telesessions, especially with the screen, can feel an atmosphere of immediacy when the session ends and our image quickly disappears with a simple click. It's not the same when you can go with the patient to the door, shake hands, smile, etc. ESIC in 2023 refers for that reason that it's very, very important to create as part of our frame a temporal patterning to the interaction that approximates what happens in person. I think that psychoanalytic presence, being the analytic dyad physically distant, needs to build as a part of the frame, for example, the possibility of communicating that the session is finishing in advance, for example, with some patients that are much more vulnerable. Even when we are not physically present in the same room, it is possible to create intimacy and effective resonance all the same. In analysis online, other types of perceptions can come from the audio or the screen of the other. For example, a baby coming into the patient's room, a mother knocking the door, a cat inside the room, etc. Each dyad needs to feel comfortable. And the combined analysis, beginning on person and continuing with telesessions, can be a help and very useful. I think so. But of what kind of intimacy are we talking about? For me, we speak about intimacy when it refers to a close, personal, and deep connection between the analyst and the patient. It involves an emotional relationship establishing trust. This is what helps the patient's self-discovery and to explore their different emotions and unconscious thoughts. This is something that happens in the office and in telesessions. But in psychoanalysis online, the vulnerability and loneliness can be much greater. Intimacy has to do with a shared space where the patient can display his pain without fear of being hurt in his pain. Intimacy is always an emotional experience, and as analysts, we need to have a lively interaction with our patients to let ourselves immerse in that emotional experience with them in a closer state of mind. The possibility of having this shared experience online in telesessions will depend to a large extent on whether both the patient and the analyst are able to accept, contain, and recognize the emotions they are experiencing. Due to the immediacy with which the sessions can be ended, with just a click, as we said before, we disappear, it will depend on the analyst open mindedness to accept the shared emotions, his restraint capacity, and his sincerity in taking charge of his own difficulties. The vital point for me is that intimacy will be promulgated if we can, as analysts, have the plasticity of mental process, understand the singularity of the analytic relations. It's not the same in the office and in telesessions. It affects personal changes, if it's in one place or in the other place. In the screen or in telephone, the analyst must begin guaranteeing the best conditions of the environment. Those are, for me, discretion, presence in absence, ability to connect with the most progressive part of the patients. Zaluskis, in 1998, says that especially by phone, we can have more intimate conversations that have been called pillow conversations. Voice inflections and nuance transmit much more information. As Blecher says in 1967, the frame acts as a support, as mainstay, but so far we have been able to perceive it only when it changes or breaks. The most powerful and durable and at the same time least apparent bulwark is then the one that lies on the frame. We have to work in the dyad with the different analytic frames. Problems appears in cases where the frame is always perfectly preserved, immobilized. Why? Because what doesn't show up will never be analyzable. We need to be curious in psychoanalytic clinical work and have a flexible mind. In telesessions, this is even much more important because we still know very little and everything is under review. And speaking about those issues, I would like to finish with something that Andrea Green wrote in his book, Unity and Diversity of Psychoanalytic Practice in 2011. He says, it's very likely that the future historians of psychoanalysis will observe that around the year 2000, there was a new paradigmatic shift in our discipline. We are living the end of a kingdom, the couch. Our practice has left behind that monopoly in favor of a necessary diversity. Face-to-face work, framing variations, what is sometimes called psychoanalytic psychotherapy, have gained residence in the contemporary analytic field. The cult of the formal framing, represented by the couch, has lost its power, giving way to a practice whose foundations is the internal framing of the analyst. When some sadly see the sign of decadency, I see a sign of renewal decisive of the Freudian project. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to have shared all this work with you.
Thank you, Liliana. As you can see, I haven't dared to make any kind of resume of each presentation because I think they all speak by themselves. What I would like to propose is at least a 10-minute discussion between the panelists. If you wanted to ask a question, if you want to discuss a topic, I think it's up to you to decide what to do. But it's nice to hear all your thoughts, opinions, and perhaps you can share what you could see and could think about others' presentation. It's up to you, please. Or if you prefer, we can go directly to questions.
Maybe maybe there is a common point between the three presentations. They are different, but as Andrea said, this is a very wide theme. But I think that the three of us underlined that there are differences between teleanalysis and psychoanalysis, but also that teleanalysis is possible and is bringing a lot of possibilities. In my presentation, also in Liliana's presentation and in Andrea, we can have maybe some topics that have to be thought, like, for example, what is to be present now? What does it mean to be present? To be present online, to be present in the session. Something is always present because my body reacts in absence, as if other body were present. Liliana is speaking about the flexibility of the analyst, of maybe the external setting, and that she's underlying that the analyst has to be flexible. And another question that she is bringing also as Andrea is the notion of emotional, the emotion online and the emotion in person. Maybe it is not so far, but it is different. I don't know, as first reaction, it is what I can say.
Andrea has a very good point on the emotion. Okay, Liliana, excuse me. Go ahead.
No, I agree with you, Martina. The three of us have these common sensations that the body in absence can give all of us a lot of things. And I loved your phrase, fishing my own sensoriality, fishing what you feel. I think that's so important. You, Andrea, you tell this with the proto-fantasies and all those things. And I think that it's so important because if we are with our mind opened and flexibility and understand what is an internal setting, and two people working together in this, as you said in the first line, Martina, two people mentally working together. I think that that's very, very important, no? Because I think that it's a part of that. Yes, I wanted to say that.
Andrea, want to say something?
Well, I thinking about all the three papers, I realized that we can confirm what it is well known in these last years, that teleanalysis can be done, and it is a source of good analysis, and sometimes it can unravel many things of the patient that we could not detect, we could not grasp in the room sessions, for example. This is absolutely well known. It is no new. Sorry for the cat. and she is not virtual. She is concrete. This is absolutely well known, but what I would like to underline is that there is a point in our psychoanalytical community. We can say everything we can about our experience, and there are tons of writings about the good experience in the teleanalytic setting, but it is impossible to convince all that all the colleagues, all the scholars who don't want to hear the good reasons of this. So it is very important to understand that this point, I mean the teleanalysis, risks to be irreconcilable between in the teleanalytic in the analytic community. So we can start from this point, and sometimes from one part and the other, it is my impression is that this is ideological and prejudicial. So it is very difficult to have sometimes a good exchange unless, for example, we are here and we can speak and talk about this very important but controversial topic.
Okay. May I make some questions? There is a question by Martin Theising. He is one of the IPA board representatives. He says, "Thank you for the sophisticated contributions. One point was not mentioned. Isn't confidentiality a basic precondition for free association and therefore for psychoanalysis? In teleanalysis, the third is included and present, the provider, the internet provider. Nobody knows what the provider will do with the material. Even the system of the Pentagon were hacked. In end-to-end encrypted systems, we are not sure about the endpoint security. The responsibility for a confidential space is given partially to the patient. An essential precondition for psychoanalysis is therefore not given in remote analysis." I will ask Andrea to start if he wants, and then Martina, then Liliana.
Well, of course, this is a very important topic, and IPA said wise recommendations about confidentiality in teleanalysis. There was a committee studying this, and with good recommendation. If the starting point is the absolute confidentiality, well, I must say that even in what we call in the room analysis, there can't be a complete sure and certain confidentiality. So it is one well-known point against teleanalysis. But you know, if even the Pentagon was hacked, so that means that we cannot be sure in any thing. So you know, hackers are everywhere, and what I think that is that maybe hackers tend to hack the Pentagon or the banks and so on, but not an teleanalytic session. And this should be underlined. So, and it is true, for example, that if I take my smartphone and go to an analyst with my smartphone in my pocket and I switch the telecamera on, I can break confidentiality anyway and anytime, even if we are face to face, for example. So it is a very important issue, and we have to struggle to ameliorate it, of course. And but I don't think we can reach an absolute certainty about this. So I think it is not an absolute point against teleanalysis.
Thank you.
And of course, we didn't speak about this with I mean, because this was not the subject of our webinar, and in the time allowed, we cannot tackle all the subjects, all the topics in this very vast dimension.
Thank you, Andrea. I will go on with questions. Next one to Martina says, Andrea has spoken of the institutional dimension of the complex topic of teleanalysis. How is the analyst's clinical work influenced by our roles as teachers and authors as we balance our patients' clinical needs against our role as creating and maintaining professional standards for our students? Do you want to answer, Martina?
But where is this question coming from? Because I think it depends a lot of the societies and the attitude in every region and every society. What I can say, just like that, I am working with a teleanalysis for 12 or 40 years. It is not because of the COVID and not because of the task force. And what I can say is that at the beginning, in an European ambiance, this point created to me strong enemies with people who didn't know me. So I think that in the prolongation of what Andrea said, it depends. We have to start without ideology, and we have to study the clinical material we can obtain, and not look. I am here working in Madrid, but I am French, and I am a member of one of the French society. And in France, directly, they said they are against. The answer to our to the first report is about 20 lines or 30 lines, but we are against. We will not. We doesn't not. We don't want to work like that. This is not a scientific position. It is what I have to say. That it is, in my way of thinking, in this moment, with the technological revolution, everybody is working online. Everybody has been working online during the COVID. We have to work on this topic and to know what can be safe and what not. I think we have to think. An analyst has to think.
Sure. I have a question now for Liliana. Everybody can answer too, from Sergio Nick. He's asking if you have already thought about the difference between the solely teleanalysis or remote analysis and the combined analysis. We know, and we have studied a lot about in-person analysis, and now there are a lot of thoughts about combined analysis. So it is important to, my point of view, to see what are the differences between being totally online and being in a combined setting.
Yes, I'm working in telesessions since 2003. So many years before the COVID, and doing researches with investigations with people from Europe, United States, Latin America. And I think that it's different if it's telesessions for training or telesessions for patients normally. For candidates, it's quite different. And I think that speaking about candidates, for example, it's difficult to think in an analyst that never saw a patient or worked with you as an analyst in the room. I think that the two procedures, the analysis in the room or to do analysis virtually, it's quite different. It has different perceptions. In the room, you have these 5 senses, and it's very important. As I said before, you can say hello, goodbye, go with the patient to the door. That doesn't happen in virtual analysis, in telesessions. And also, I think that it's a lot of all those things, not because I think that it's quite different. And if you have a combined analysis with a patient normally and more with training candidates, you can show them and help them much more. It's not the same. The two have very good reasons to be like that, but it's quite different in all the senses. And also what I wanted to add about what Martina said and Andrea, that it's not a thing of ideology. I think that the same that with the body, different theoricals, the ideas will have different bodies. It's not the same if you think about Melanie Klein or Bion or Winnicott. Each of them will think the body different. But it's experience, and it's what happens with each patient, case by case, what it's needed. For instance, with people more vulnerable or people that are mourning because they had someone died or something like that, or they are very vulnerable, maybe it's not so good to have telesessions or only telesessions. I think I don't agree with only telesessions with candidates, for instance. That's my opinion. A combined work, I think that brings a lot of things much better.
Thank you. Anyone want to comment? Then I will go to
and I
next.
wanted to agree something only, that it's not the same when it begins in the office and after goes to telesessions, that is only telesessions. It's very important also when it begins many times in the room.
I think that this last point is very important, because if the patient had previously a presential analyst, he has an internal setting. And he's still working maybe without image, without lying on a couch and so on. It is totally different if we start with an online treatment.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Next question. I don't know if it happens only to me, but working online makes me feel more tired. Also, I have the tendency to get distracted easily. What do you think about it?
But this is true. This is true. I think that this is true. It's sometimes it's more difficult, it's more tiring, and yes, we can be distracted. But this gives me the possibility to underline something that we hadn't the time to underline. I have stressed many times that all these things that happen around the telesessions and which are part of the concrete concrete material of the computer, of the platforms, and so on, have to be analyzed as one of the many things that come from the patient, but not from the patient alone, but from a third part, which is the technological part. This is another of the proto-informatic elements I talked about. So we have to analyze this, for example, a sudden interruption.
Yes.
Rush, or the cat, like before that that went here, and so we have to analyze this as material, as usual material in analysis. Only that it is a third part of a digital. I called it a digital third. Which comes into the session, and we have to elaborate between the patient. So this is very important, and I think it is one of the features that makes teleanalysis more tiring, for example.
I want to say something more.
Please.
I think that also in many cases, I work opening the screen with image, saying hello, greeting the patient, after closing the image, and opening again when it's the end. In those cases, it's very similar to having a session in a room. And I think that in those cases, fatigue, it's not so much, but also depends of case by case by the different patients, because also in the room, many times we get very fatigued with some patients. But what's it's true is that if you have a patient by telephone, for example, and the line cuts, many times we don't know if it's the same by screen, because something happens with Wi-Fi or because it's a resistance of the patient. So that's also something to think about.
Okay. I have a question from Dennis Porch that in a way get together many other questions. I will read it. Prior to going into psychiatry and adult and child psychoanalysis, I was an anesthesiologist. In anesthesia, it was very important to observe skin color, pulse, O2, CO2, movements, and etc. In the psychoanalytic room, I am able to decipher more than facial expression. I can see both skin color, rashes, movements of legs, arms, and fingers, etc. This all contributes to my counter-transference. Is it not our responsibility to communicate this to our colleagues and our patients? It is not very important to be as much alone together as possible. I will start with Martina, if she wishes to answer it, or anybody who wants to answer that question. There is another one that I can try to find here. Just a minute. Nesrim Altinel, thank you for organizing such a rich webinar. I remembered one of my patients said to me in a session, I feel so nervous right now because I was looking your leg and I thought whether you are thinking that I have any sexual idea of you. I wonder if we would be in telesession, we will miss the chance to walking through this type of feeling or tension. Thank you so much. There are a lot of questions about the difference between being in teleanalysis or in in-person sessions.
Yes, it is very difficult to answer this question if it is not case by case. The only thing that I am thinking in this moment is that with the experience, even online, I can detect, I can see a lot of details about if my patient is sad, if he has pain, if I don't used to be surprised when I know them in person. I always make a mistake about the size. If they are tall or not tall, less tall or more tall or taller, but on the other points, not. Of course, the encounter and the sexuality is very different in the room or online. One of my patient was working during the COVID, first online, and then one day she came and she sexualized all the scene, all the room and the relationship, and all the discourse she had. I was very astonished because it was very new, but we cannot conclude about that. I think that what is a real advantage is when we change the frame, when we have a change of the setting, when the patient is coming in person, or when the person is being online. In this moment, in these changes, we can obtain a lot of informations. They are very rich.
I agree.
Yes,
Yes,
I think that what Martina says is very fundamental, case by case. I am thinking in patients as I had one in the office, and afterwards, with the COVID, I had it in telesessions, and he became very erotic and very with sexuality ideas associated with me. And I was astonished because I would never think that about him, and fantasies and actings, and that he never had them when he was in present. And another patient that in telesession was quite different after, became very aggressive with me when she came in presence. So I think that, as Martina says, we highlight that another different senses is when we have a screen or we are by telephone. We highlight the visual, as I say, the silences, the verbal is highlighted, and other things. And I think that it's case by case, but in both, in the room and in telesessions, all those things happened in different ways, different of each patient.
There are a lot of questions about differences between training analysis and not training analysis. People are really interested in discussing this topic. As the title of this webinar is also about the institution, and the institution needs to think about remote training. I would like to hear your opinion, if you may wish to say something about it.
Maybe you can start, Andrea, as you prepared a part about that.
It is very difficult to summarize, of course, and I can remember that in the first task force we were asked to say something about suggestions and recommendations for training analysis, training teleanalysis, and so on. And we did this, working hard for more than 15 months, and during the pandemic, we offered some recommendations for the training analysis, and I think the second committee, the second task force, is continuing in studying this in depth, and so it will be extremely difficult to go in details about this, but of course there are differences between training analysis and not training analysis, let's say normal analysis. I apologize for this definition, but anyway, so I don't think we can go in details, but training analysis has to think about the differences in geographical situation, in political conditions, and so on, and what we call the reasonable access to teleanalysis. This is easily readable in the IPA website, where it is published, and everyone can read this and has his own idea about this.
Thank you, Andrea.
But I would like to add only a little thing, that it is a risk for all of us who are dealing with this subject and try to understand it more and more. I think that the great variability of tones testifying to the magmatic nature of such a theme, together with the fact of its transformation into a sort of battleground between proponents of the various theories and institutional political visions, is an important sign of the fact that these many attitudes, techno-favorable or techno-negative, are unfortunately weighed down by what gives the appearance of a theoretical scientific background, but is actually, and very often, I would say, strongly ideologized, prejudicial, conflict-ridden, and biased. So it is. This is the real point that we should think of. We should study in depth.
For me, it's very difficult to think an analyst that never saw a patient in the room. For that, I think very much in the combined analysis. I think that Full telesessions for me with training candidates, it's something difficult to think about. But I can understand that in many places they cannot come, never. But we have to think that a candidate, an analyst that will become an analyst, can work only with telesessions, or I think that the two experiences are fundamental. It's not the same. It's very important, the two, and as I said before, telesessions cannot be the second choice as something that, well, it's okay, but not so good. It cannot be. I think the combined analysis is very important.
Of
Martina?
course, I agree totally with what Andrea and Liliana have said. For me, it is absolutely impossible to imagine a candidate, an analyst, without the experience of presential work. But I think that I said previously that if there is even for the candidate a change in the setting, and I had it during the COVID, my patient in analysis changed the setting, and it has been usually, I don't know if I can generalize, but it has been the moment to have access to new material, impossible otherwise. So it has been an enlargement in our work.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But obviously, we cannot speak about analysis only online. Maybe it can be another kind of work.
Sure. We are coming to the end of our webinar. I want to thank all the participants that were able to attend it online. We were up to 260 participants. I want to thank you very much, Andrea, Martina, and Liliana, for your patient and very thoughtful presentations, and also to discuss such difficult and nowadays issues that we are trying to discuss here at this webinar. I need now to invite you all to the next webinar. It should be appearing here. It would be in 27 October, Death and Illness in the Psychoanalytical Process. The speakers will be Trove Triesdal and Gabriele Junkers from Norway and Germany. Thank you all for your participation, your question. I never seen so many questions. We were up to 62 questions. I'm sorry if we couldn't present all the questions, but I think it was worth to be at this webinar. Thank you so much. See you at the next webinar. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sergio.
Thank you, Sergio. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for
Thank you, Sergio. Thank you very much.
and thank
you
you to
all the people in the audience.
the organizers, and so on. Thank you very much.
It was a pleasure to be here today. So thank you a lot to all of you.
Yes.